Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of my podcast, Refining Rhetoric. I'm Robert Bortons, your host. Today's episode includes an interview with Lisa Bailey, a veteran homeschool mom. If you've been around classical conversations for any period of time, chances are you've been influenced by her work in some way. After that, I'll do a brief recap and unpack a few of the tools of learning from our interview, as well as use those same tools to discuss the sanctity of life. And finally, Will McCurry will dive into the Bitcoin halving cycles, which is related to mining and the number of Bitcoins that are being created on a daily basis in our classical crypto. Let's get started.
Classical Conversations Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Lisa Bailey is a beloved member of our Classical Conversations community. She has homeschooled her girls through the challenge years and currently hosts our longest running podcast. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. It's kind of fun to be on this side of the microphone for once.
Yeah, it's always fun to interview people, but it's also fun to be interviewed because you always feel like you have a little bit more flexibility on what you say.
I know. I like to talk, so that's fun.
Well, a lot of listeners might know you, but chances are they don't know why you started homeschooling in the first place. So take us back. Where did your journey with home education begin?
That is so interesting. And I have to say that it was kind of a long time ago. And the thing I think that I want to remind people of first is that a long time ago, nobody did this. Nobody homeschooled. When I was little, when I was coming up through the education ranks myself, nobody did this. The only homeschool that I was familiar with as a child was a friend who had been burned in a home fire, and she had to be homeschooled while she recovered from her burns. But the goal was always for her to get back to school ASAP. And so when I was growing up, homeschool was not a thing. Now, when I grew up and got married, my husband David's a pastor, and we made some excellent friends when he was in seminary. And they had kids a few years before David and I did, and they were homeschooling. Now, one of the families was electing to homeschool primarily because I thought they were going on the mission field. And so they were homeschooling so that there would not be any educational interruption for their children. At least that's what I assumed. When Stephanie was getting old enough for us to start thinking about school, my friend Alicia said, "You just need to homeschool." And I said the same thing that everybody always says, "Oh, I could never do that. I'm just not really sure that's what we ought to do." And she said, "Come on, you're already doing it." They stayed with us on furlough one of their trips home. And she said, "I'm watching you. You're already homeschooling. You just need to do this." And so she was such a good encourager to me. And her children were such a beautiful example of the relationships that families develop when they educate together, that I decided that I would try it. And actually, Robert, by this time, Stephanie was 3.5, 4 years old, and I had become sort of addicted to the light bulb moments. And I loved telling her something for the 100th time, and then all of a sudden seeing her little brain make the connection, and her eyes would light up or her eyebrows would shoot upward. And I thought, this is seriously fun. And I did not want to share that. So really, I think that for me, we got started in homeschooling not because I was running away from something. I wasn't afraid at that juncture that my child's mind was going to be polluted or that she was going to be in a dangerous school situation. I wasn't really running away from something. I was really running toward something. And so when we started homeschooling, I did not know about classical conversations, but I had read The Well-Trained Mind. Actually, I think I was the reason that book circulated so much one year at our public library because I kept checking it out and reading it thinking, oh, this is so cool, but I could never do that. And then I would take it back to the library and then I would think, but I'm really drawn to that. And I would check it out again. And I would try to create that system of classical education at home. And we did lots of reading and we did lots of exploring and lots of hands-on stuff. And I was really big into integration and what does this have to do? What does this story have to do with what we saw on our walk this morning? And what does that have to do with what you watched Daddy fix in the backyard this weekend and all of that. We did a lot of memorizing. We memorized tons of poems. And I really, really loved the classical model. It resonated with us, but it was very hard to recreate solo.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we didn't start classical conversations until my oldest daughter was going into the 5th grade and my youngest was going into the 2nd grade. And then we jumped in at the foundations level and life was good. And that has been great since then in our homeschooling.
Well, that's so relatable because I hear from moms all the time how, they're in your shoes, I could never do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing friends or family who have kids, you're like, wow, they're a integrated family who loves one another and the kids listen and just things that we take for granted as homeschoolers that the world is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, at least some of the veteran homeschoolers, hear a lot of the same things, reading The Well-Trained Mind, trying to implement it and knowing that there's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's, very overwhelming and hard to know.
And hard to recreate. It's hard. It's a full-time job to pull all of those resources, to do it to the extent that I was trying to do. We would do great in August and September and October. And then November was a little wonky, but December we could do a lot of Christmassy stuff. And by January, I was thinking, oh, if we can just make it to the end of the year and finish this math curriculum, I'll be happy. And so it got harder and harder to reproduce all of that good stuff on my own.
And I know some moms love it. And of course, even my own wife, adds and takes things away.
Yes.
But having classical conversations kind of already do all the hard work, I think saves moms 10, 20 hours a week just in prep because they know they can have the confidence in doing what the curriculum has and knowing what to add on to it.
That confidence is a huge thing. And for us, as really what persuaded my husband that this was a good thing for our family to do was looking at the challenge program. So it was the confidence that what we're doing with our little kids is leading somewhere intentionally, and it's leading to a really amazing relationship, but also education.
That's great. So when you started homeschooling, I'm guessing homeschooling was legal in almost all the states.
Yeah.
But what type of things have you seen through the years that have come at homeschoolers? We know that, there's a lot of challenges that we face just from legislation or lack of materials. Like what are some of those things that you've seen?
Well, in the early years, probably not as much because I'm not as old as people might think I am. There wasn't as much problem. It was legal when we started. And the earliest years where a lot of publishers refused to sell to homeschoolers had passed. And so by the time we got into homeschooling, there was a wealth of materials available. I can remember the first year I went to the North Carolina homeschool conference thinking, I am a kid in a really big candy store. How many of these books can I take home with me? There was just tons of resources and I wanted one of each. So resources were not a problem. Now, what still was a problem was the perception of homeschooling. I can remember my own parents, and especially my younger sister, thinking that we were going to ruin our children. My sister later on admitted to me that she thought we were going to raise totally unsocialized children that would not know how to carry on a conversation.
And if we've met your daughters, which they've worked for us, and that's the opposite.
Yes, they can carry on a conversation. My sister did several years later come to me and say, and I didn't know she thought this at the time, but she came to me later and she said, I have to apologize for what I thought about homeschooling before you got involved. She said, this is amazing. I like to see your children coming because I can have conversations about real things with them. They are interested in things that they know about and in things they don't know about. And so, but there was a huge perception about what homeschoolers would be like and what they would not be able to do. And so that was a little bit of a hurdle to climb. There weren't nearly as many resources 20 some years ago as there are now for homeschoolers. I know I had friends who wanted their little boys to play baseball or play football, and they wanted them to play competitively, and there weren't as many recreational opportunities open to homeschoolers as there are now. And so that has changed a little bit. And I know, Robert, that homeschooling in every state is a little bit different. We live in North Carolina, and it is a fairly easy state in which to homeschool. The state does not put a lot of requirements on us. We are supposed to keep a record of regular attendance. We're supposed to keep a shot record. We're supposed to provide proof that we are doing assessment testing at the end of every year. But we don't have to file lesson plans, and we do not have to exist under any kind of umbrella organization. And I do know that, there have been noises from time to time in North Carolina about needing to regulate homeschoolers in the state. And I remember thinking when I first heard that, oh, you don't know what you're asking. You do not want to wake this sleeping giant, because homeschoolers in North Carolina are not only very passionate, they are very well informed, and they are very articulate. So whenever noise was made about maybe regulating them more, they got so much backlash or feedback that was so well researched and so well articulated that has kind of died down every time that I have been aware of it.
Yeah, they now that there's 10% of all North Carolinian students are being homeschooled. I know there is some rumblings, at the beginning of this or end of this semester about, we need to regulate homeschooling again. And I think that got squelched pretty quickly.
Yes, I think it's really interesting. I guess that probably still the thing that may cause some parents to pause or to wonder is just that struggle for respect. But that is lessening. That struggle is lessening every year. As homeschooled students are tested and as homeschool students are seen out in the community, their lives are a testimony to the strength and the possibilities within homeschooling.
Yeah, I see that around us, and just businesses come to us all the time now. It's like, hey, how do we hire your graduates? Like, we want your homeschoolers working for us.
Absolutely. I can remember when the girls went to college, the first interaction we had with one of the college professors, we went for parent day or something, and we were talking to one of the professors, and he said, your daughter is just incredibly prepared for this. She appears to have, studied most of this already before. He said, but what really impressed him was that she seemed to have an idea of where his particular subject matter fit in the big picture. It was a history class. So in the big picture of world history. So what came before and led to his subject and what was coming after. And he said, it's just, she seems to really have a grasp on the big picture as well as on the details. Where did she go to high school? And I was able to say, well, she was homeschooled. And he said, now say what? And so I explained to him what we did. I explained to him what Classical Conversations helped us to provide, the outline. And he said, he listened and he asked some more questions. And as we were walking away, he said, well, do you have any more children, and will you send them here, and will you send their friends who are part of this program here? And so we have actually sent a lot of students to that university since then.
That's awesome. So over the years, I'm sure you've got a lot of war stories and a lot of successes under your belt, but what are some of your favorite memories of homeschooling?
I look back and I really do tell people this, and I really do actually mean it. I have loved being the homeschooling mom of my girls at every age, and I have mourned a little bit every time they moved to a new stage because I loved where we were. even after I knew I was going to love where we were going, I just kind of missed the old times. Because I remember when they were really little, and we would have our morning time a lot of times on the couch, and we would be reading a devotion. One of their favorites was a book called Hind's Feet on High Places, and it was a story. It was an allegorical story of a little girl named Much Afraid, and our goal was to read one chapter of that book after we did our scripture reading and before we had our prayer time. And I loved that they begged for more reading time. They begged for more time together whenever we read out loud. And so I really did love that. I love those foundations years where I was determined, at least at the beginning of it all, to keep up with everything that they knew and memorized. I bet you can relate to this, Robert. And so I did really well with that timeline until there were about 24 cards. And then their speed was faster than lightning. And I constantly was saying, wait, don't say it. I just need to get the next 8 in my brain. But that was really fun. The races to do that. I loved the presentation successes. I had one daughter who always loved to talk and was never at a loss for words. And she would present to you on anything that she thought of, whether or not you seemed interested. But then I had one daughter who really, she had lots of thoughts, but she did not like to be the center of attention. And so I loved seeing her equipped to present. Even if she never got to where she loved it, I loved that she was equipped to do that. I loved mock trial. Now, I was a Challenge B director, so I loved mock trial from all its directions, but I loved watching the girls come into their own. For me, I feel like Challenge B is one of the years when the students change the most. And I loved being more than the fly on the wall, watching that transformation through that 8th grade year. That was super.
Yeah, we always hear so many good things from the judges and lawyers that do the mock trials about our students. And almost every time we talk to them, like, they're better than the high schoolers, or they're better than the college students, or hey, can they come work for our law firms?
Yes. Yeah. I had a judge one time say, I have law school students who apparently don't have as much mock trial experience as these students do. Who was their teacher? Who taught them this? And I remember saying, this group of mamas right here, we did it. We taught them. We shepherded them, and so that mock trial was awesome. One of my favorite memories is of one of my daughters who is not a writer. She never felt like she was a good writer. She struggled to get her thoughts down. And so Challenge A, when she was learning to write papers, and that's back when we were still using IEW and Challenge A, and she could follow the formula, and she wrote her last long paper. And I had her stand up and read it out loud to her dad. And when she got done, she just had this astounded look on her face, and it brings tears to my eyes still, because what she said was, Mama, I am a good writer. And it was all worth it. All the weeks and months of tears and struggle to meet the expectations. She proved to herself that she could be a good writer. And that was awesome. I mean, some of my memories are not of great successes, but they're still successful memories to me. One of my daughters was in Challenge 2, and the art grant project, if you guys know, the art grant proposal was due that day, and she had worked really hard on her art grant proposal and had put time and effort into a really stellar visual aid. And I was a tutor at the time, and so we struggled to get out the door on time. I was very much of an on-time person, and get your stuff together. You're in Challenge 2. I'm not responsible for your stuff. Get it together, get it in the car. We're leaving. And so we got halfway to community, and she just said real matter-of-factly, we're going to have to turn back. And I'm like, no, I'm feeling like we're not going to turn back. We live 25 minutes from community. And I said, no, actually we can't, because I have parents of my Challenge B students who are expecting to meet me with some questions. Oh, we have to go back because I left my visual aid at home. Yeah. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. We are not going to be going back. So I suggest that you craft a new plan. Well, can I call Daddy and get him to bring it to me? And I said, well, I'll pass you my phone, but if daddy asks me whether or not he should bring it to you, I'll say no. And she was so angry with me. She was just, I think she was shocked that I wasn't going to quote unquote help her out. And so she actually had to do her art grant proposal. I guess she drew something on the board, and she still did really well.
Right.
But she had a little bit of a hard feeling toward me because she felt like she would have done better if she'd had her visual aid. But you know why that's a positive memory to me? Because she never forgot again what was important to her work that day. And so it was a hard and an uncomfortable lesson. But wow, what an easy way to learn that lesson in a time where it's not going to burn you too badly.
Yeah.
So that to me was success.
I think that's one of the beauties of homeschooling is you can help your students learn those type of life lessons in a situation where it doesn't affect their results of their lives. And in this case, benefits them in the long run.
Yeah, where you feel like, okay, if your kid is going to drive and if when you give your child the wheel, they drive into the ditch the first time, I mean, that's not great, but you are there to help them pull the car back onto the road. And so better to try and have a few failures while you are there to help course correct and hold their hand and tell them it's not the end and we can keep going and we can try again. Or let me give you a chance. I'll be your brainstorm partner and you can figure out what you can do since this thing can't be done. What else could you do? And that's a great life skill.
Absolutely. What of the challenge strands do you think you struggled with or stretched you the most? And what are some tips that you might have for moms who might be having their own struggles and challenge?
Well, I was a political science major in college, and I have always liked to read and write and argue and speak. And I loved history and I loved philosophy. I loved all of that stuff. I did not love math and science as much. And so I suspected that I would not enjoy ushering my children through those quite as much. And that proved to be true some of the time. I remember when we got to challenge 3 and chemistry, and you know, you have your children are different. Every child is different. That's God's sense of humor. If you have one and you think, oh, I finally got this figured out, the second one will be completely different and you won't have it figured out at all. So one of my daughters went through chemistry pretty much on her own, not really loving it, but not asking for a lot of help. And one wanted more. And so chemistry was a subject that I elected to study shoulder to shoulder with one of my daughters, and we got into the midst of it, and I thought, oh my stars, this is more chemistry than I ever knew in high school. And I mean, we're still in the first semester, and I thought, yep, this is more chemistry than I did in an entire year. And that was 30 years ago. So I'm not happy to be doing this. And so we would get to concepts that I would think, okay, I understand that. But when we're trying to do the problems, it was the math. I did not remember the math. And I would say to my daughter, okay, so you guys worked on this. You worked some of these problems in class for good or ill. I was not in class with you and I do not remember this math. And so we're going to have to know the math in order to do the problem. And so she would say, but I don't remember. And I'll be like, well, go ask daddy. My husband was a math minor. I said, just go ask daddy. He'll teach you to do this and I'll be right here and we'll do it when we give it. No, don't make me ask daddy. I think that she just felt like he was going to explain it in a way that she wouldn't understand and she wouldn't be comfortable. And finally, I would just say, fine, I will go ask daddy. Daddy can teach me. I will teach you and we'll get back on track. But I can remember, Robert, I'll tell you, one of the biggest homeschool life lessons that I learned was during that struggle with chemistry, because I can remember weeks of looking at her in frustration and saying, what in the world? How are you coming home utterly unsure of how to do this? And your tutor was there with you and she should have explained this to you. I heard myself one day say, your tutor should have explained this to you and y'all should have done enough examples so that everybody came home. And it's like I was having an out-of-body experience. And I heard those words coming out of my mouth and thought, oh no. And I stopped mid-sentence and she looked at me like, what's the matter? And I said, okay, let's just take a deep breath. I need to walk around for a minute. And I came back and I said, I have to apologize to you. I said, this is really bad. I said, what? She said, why? She said, I'm really sorry. I don't remember. I said, no, I think I have given you the impression that it is your tutor's responsibility to teach you these concepts. And that's just not it. I said, if it's anybody's responsibility besides yours, it's mine as your parent, as your homeschooling mama. And I said, so really, really, it's your responsibility and mine with you. And so let's go back and find the last thing that we did understand, and we'll just walk forward together again. I said, because it's not Miss Carey's job to teach you, it's our job to learn. And I just went on, and that was great. But you know what, Robert? I guess I'm a hard-headed learner. My brain's not as plastic as my girls, because when she got to college, several years later, she ended up in a class for which she had not taken the prerequisite class. And I was like, what in the world? Who is your advisor? And why is she so lame that she let this happen? Well, how did you get in this class? I said, you're just going to need to go back and say to her that you don't have the prerequisite and there's missing knowledge and you can't go forward. And I said, you just need to go have a meeting. And, I gave her the whole spiel, and she said, okay, Mama, I'll take care of it. So a couple of weeks later, I said, by the way, did you ever get that class dropped, and what have you picked up? And she said, oh, no, I didn't drop the class. And I said, well, did you talk to your advisor at least? And she said, no, Mama. And I said, what in the world is happening? She said, it's all good. It's all good. She said, I was able to look at what I didn't understand, and I was able to figure out I was just missing pieces of the grammar. And once I figured out what I was missing, I just went online and found what I needed, and I learned that, and now I'm all caught up. And I said, you did what? And she said, Mama, remember, my teacher is not responsible for teaching me. I'm responsible for learning. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. And I thought, well, my work here is done now. I can go and get myself in line because my child has taken responsibility for her own learning. And so I guess one thing I would say to parents who are listening is be humble. Get used to learning lessons alongside your children. And sometimes they're character lessons. And think about how fruitful a hard lesson could really be. And think about leaning into your challenges instead of running away from them or farming them out to somebody else. I often ask parents now when they say, this is too hard for my student, or my student's not reacting well to this thing that they don't know. I often ask parents at Practicum, I want you to think with me. Think about how you react when you have to learn something new. Do you embrace it eagerly? Do you run away from it? Do you get angry because you don't know something? Are you moved to go ask somebody, or you moved to go find the answer yourself? Here's the thing. Even if you feel angry or fearful, the truth is we don't have to act on our feelings. We can actually choose to search for the grammar. We can choose to find a mentor. We can choose to remember the tools, the classical tools of learning, and recognize that, hey, if this stage is hard, it probably means either that we don't have all the grammar that we need, or that we somehow are not putting the pieces together well so that understanding blooms. We're either missing grammar or we're missing dialectic if we're not able to do with our knowledge what we are expected to do with it. I would really encourage parents. I know I picked chemistry to work on with one of my daughters. And sometimes you pick a subject that your child's going to struggle with, but sometimes you might pick a subject that you both love. I remember picking a literature class with my older daughter because we like to talk about the ideas together. We like to dream up. Okay. And I would all the time say, oh my gosh, the paper I could write about this now,
Yeah.
that I know how to think about it more classically. And she would just roll her eyes and say, sure, Mom, you go ahead and write that paper. But I would encourage all parents to pick one subject a year and do the deep dive with your student. Not only will it allow you to reclaim your own education, but it will give you a really true picture of the learning that your student is being asked to do. You will be able to see what are all the steps of grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric as they apply to that student. And the other thing that it will do is build your relationship like nothing else. Struggling with the subject will build your relationship like nothing else. And just the sheer joy of spending that time with your student will never be a regret, I suspect.
Well, the Bible tells us that it's better to do something together, and a strand of three cords is not easily broken. And so, what are some of the benefits that you experienced in a CC community?
I have loved all of our communities through the years, and it has been a blessing. I think there's so many blessings. Friends, we have made some of the best friends of our lives. The girls, they used to tell people that classical conversations was the best of both worlds because they got to homeschool, which meant that we had the freedom and the flexibility to learn when and where it fit our family priorities. But they also had a quote unquote class. They had classmates, and they have stayed in touch. I mean, my girls have had CC classmates in their weddings, both of them. My older daughter and her classmates are planning a 10-year CC graduation reunion for this May. They're still in touch. So they gained friends. I gained friends. I gained traveling companions on the homeschool journey. And that has been huge. That's been a huge means of encouragement and inspiration. I know when we first started out, we had friends who had older children that were older than mine, and they were an inspiration that you could do this. You could keep on doing this. They were very inspiring. Community has been a blessing to my girls because it has introduced them to other loving adults. It was another set of eyes and ears and hearts that were loving on my girls and mentoring them. Their directors through the years, their tutors. It has been a blessing that they had other adults that I knew they could turn to who loved them and loved the Lord and would give wise counsel to them. Communities provided us with a lot of good ideas, areas that I wasn't good at, thinking of different games to play or different activities or maybe something that would meet one of my girls' different learning style. If they learned in a way differently than I did, it was good to have somebody say, hey, but that's the way I learned too, and this would help me. They gave me lots of resources. The people were resources, not just the books they offered to loan me, because they had one of everything that I didn't have one of, and so that was great. And kind of like Aaron was Moses's arm holder when he got tired. Then Aaron held up his arms. And so I used to say this at Practicum all the time. When we're in community together, as long as we don't all have a bad day on the same day, we all can keep going. Because somebody will pull us up out of the pit and remind us of why we decided to do this big, hairy, audacious thing and why we could keep going.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. If people want to hear more from you, they can go to our Everyday Educator podcast, which you run. And just thank you for being open with us and sharing. I think a lot of people have family members who disdain or question their homeschooling. And
sure.
I know even our own family had that with grandparents who later claimed to always have supported the homeschooling.
Yes.
Even I remember them not being so fond of it at the beginning.
Yep.
But is there anywhere else our listeners could reach you?
You can get a hold of me on Practicum videos, old Practicum videos. I show up there a lot. I was been blessed to kind of shepherd the practicum for several years. And so that's a great way to get a hold of me. As a member of the curriculum development team, we write lots of articles that we put out in support materials. So there's lots of that stuff floating around on CC Connected as well.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, thanks again for being here today and just all the homeschoolers that you've blessed throughout the years.
Thanks, Robert. It's been a joy to be with you.
In our classical recap, this is an opportunity where we introduce some of those ideas of the trivium and how we're using those in this segment. And so in the 5 core habits of grammar, the repetition that builds knowledge, one of those core habits is storytelling. And one of my favorite things about my interview with Lisa was hearing her tell stories. Making memories with our children is one of the many blessings of homeschooling through high school. In the 5 common topics of dialectic, the questions that develop understanding, let's look at the tool of circumstances. I love that Lisa was running toward the joy of teaching her children when she and her family decided to homeschool. It's so easy to get caught up in all the things we want to protect our children from by teaching them at home, but it's so much more important for us to focus on what we're bringing them as we steward their hearts. And in the 5 canons of rhetoric, the artifact that demonstrate wisdom, invention. You might have noticed that I use the tool of invention as I interviewed Lisa. Invention is simply asking questions through the 5 common topics to better understand a particular subject. So when I asked Lisa for her testimony about a rewarding aspect of homeschooling, I was using the tool of invention. By practicing the 15 tools of learning, we can become better educators and better understand the world around us. So let's practice these same tools with current events. Of course, these tools of learning aren't just for academic pursuits, but also to help us understand the world around us. This is a 2-part discussion. The first part, which you can hear on my previous podcast, and that was approaching the issue from a classical and constitutional perspective and what questions we may ask. Part 2 is approaching it from a biblical perspective and what questions we may ask. From the 5 core habits in storytelling, we may want to go back and read Genesis 1 and 2, see what the inerrant word of God says about his creation, man and woman, and some of our roles. In the 5 common topics of dialectic testimony, we were going to want to see what the Bible says about children, mothers, families, and babies. Some of those verses that may be of interest to you are Ecclesiastes 11:5, where the Lord talks about how he formed the body in the mother's womb. Psalm 127, 3-5, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Psalm 139, 13-16, you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. And Luke 1:44, as soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ear, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. And of course, that's John the Baptist, who prepared the way for Jesus while he was still a fetus, while he was still in his mother's womb. And we'll want to do a comparison in circumstances to see what the Bible says about shedding innocent blood. And in Deuteronomy 27:25 says, cursed be anyone who takes a bribe to shed innocent blood, and the people shall say, Amen. You may have heard in the news that some companies are offering their employees financial incentives to travel to other states in order to abort their child. In other words, they don't want their workplace to be interrupted, and so they'll pay you to kill your own child. Psalm 106:38, they poured out innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. In the 5 canons of rhetoric, arrangement, sorting into organized thought. So while we have some of these Bible verses that are a good place for you to start, it is important that we look at the whole Bible. We look at the whole story because it is a redemptive story. And we see the Old Testament pointing to the need of a Redeemer. And in the New Testament, Jesus coming and dying for our sins. And so while we need to have a biblical worldview on a post-U.S. Roe versus Wade, we also need to think about how we express ourselves and how we take care of the hurting and needy. So the last time I challenged you to go find out more about your local pro-life pregnancy center. If you haven't done that, please do so. Also, considering talking to your pastor in church about what can be done locally to support moms in your area who may need that love of Christ and be in a dire situation. The overturning Roe v. Wade is going to be an opportunity for us to show God's love to a hurting world. I want to take a quick minute to tell you about Actors Bible, a web-based app that retells the narrative of the scriptures through dramatic scenes for your family, and you have the ability to reenact them. Using your desktop, tablet, or smartphone, you can select a teleprompter script of a Bible story for you and your family to act out so you can learn God's Word in a fun and interactive way. To sign up for Actors Bible today, visit actor.bible/signup. Now back to the show.
Welcome to Classical Crypto with Will. Today we are looking at a pivotal event that happens to Bitcoin's blockchain. It's called the Bitcoin halving cycle. To date, not only does this event affect Bitcoin, it has determined the bear and bull cycles of the entire crypto market over the last 12 to 14 years. Essentially, this event causes inflation, so it causes the price to go up in the cryptocurrency's price, by reducing the number of Bitcoins released into circulation and increasing demand for Bitcoin in the process. Bitcoin halving has implications for everyone involved, the stakeholders, and everything in the ecosystem. To explain what a Bitcoin halving is, again, I just want to go back to how the Bitcoin network operates with a block. It's really important. So again, the technology that runs Bitcoin is called blockchain, and it basically consists of a collection of computers or nodes that run Bitcoin software, and they contain a history of transactions on the network. Each full node contains a history of transactions on Bitcoin and is responsible for approving or rejecting transactions on the network. After the approval process, the transaction is appended to the existing blockchain and broadcast to all the other nodes. So that basically explains how a block is approved. Okay, let's drive the point home so you can get this. Bitcoin miners, they are mining blocks. Back in 2009, the reward for producing a block that worked was 50 Bitcoins. Now you can see after every 3.5 to 4 years when this halving cycle happens, when a miner mines a block, the supply or the reward giving back to them went from 50 Bitcoins to 25 Bitcoins, cut in half again to 12.5 Bitcoins, 6.25 Bitcoins. So they cut that reward in half and half and half. To put this in context, imagine if the amount of gold mined out of the earth was cut in half every 4 years. If gold's value is based on its scarcity, then a halving of gold output every 4 years would theoretically drive its price. And this is what's happening in Bitcoin, and we already know that there's a fixed supply of 21 million Bitcoins. There will never be more. There will never be less. A centralized bank can't come in and go, hey, we're going to increase the supply. Now it's 42 million Bitcoins. No, that absolutely cannot happen. So you can see why inflation happens. You can see why the value of Bitcoin keeps going up as it gets more scarce and more scarce. And miners now, they have to make a decision. We used to mine a block and get 12.5 Bitcoin. Now it's 6.25. How does that affect our operating costs? But at the same time, the market is seeing the scarcity. It's harder to get Bitcoin, so they're paying more to receive it. And that is how the Bitcoin halving cycle works. And as Bitcoin is the granddaddy of all cryptos, the rest of the market ebbs and flows with this cycle.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, be sure to share it with a friend and be sure to check out future episodes as we dive into more practice with the 15 tools of learning. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation. And visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.